Hey everyone, Psychrayasin here, and in this video, I want to talk about how not to get overwhelmed with fundamentals. And the way I do that is to break things down into manageable chunks. So what do I mean by that? Well, to have an effective illustration, usually, or like a design or something, it incorporates a lot of different fundamentals. And students are often confused about which fundamental should they learn first. What do I study first? And for me, the way I think about it is like, well, you could do any of them because they're all needed. You just use them differently, but often I start to guide them in a certain order, and it usually goes something like this. Like proportion is the first one that I tell people to learn. Proportion. Then often it's gesture. This one isn't considered too much in animation. It's really thought about strongly, gesture, like getting a good gesture. But outside of animation, it's often not considered too important, but I think it's really important. I think about design, like shape design. And this, again, it's thought about a lot in design, but it's not thought about a lot in let's say, animation, you think about this a lot, but in some of the things like caricature, you're not going to think, oh, actually you would. I guess it's just not talked about a lot, shape design, as a fundamental, but I think it is. So you have like proportion, then you have perspective, that's a big one, and one that's very daunting and scary, and for a lot of people anyway. You have to deal with anatomy. That's huge. Very, very important if you want to draw, people or animals or creatures even. Anatomy is very important. You have proportion, perspective, anatomy. Those are like the big drawing ones, along with composition. So composition, I think, as well as design, these are related because it's really how you arrange things to make an appealing image. And then you have sort of like the more painterly fundamentals, which I think of as values, edges, and color. And then you have, so these are more like drawing. This is what I consider drawing. It doesn't matter if you use a pencil, a pen, a brush, stylus, anything. If you're dealing with these, I feel like you're dealing with drawing issues. So sometimes I'll say, well, the drawing's not very good. And someone will think like, well, I didn't do it with pencil and paper. I was trying to paint it. And it's like, no. Like these issues, the proportion, the perspective, the anatomy, the composition need work. And these are like the painting ones. And then there are like finishing. I feel like there's finishing techniques as well. Finishing. And those are, kind of dealing with texture or line quality if you're doing a drawing, thick to thin, stuff like that. So that is like an extra thing on top. And that, in painting, you deal with that too, like brushwork, trying to make things look nice. But yeah, these are the fundamentals, and there's always a lot of fundamentals. If you're talking about car design, you'd probably have more fundamentals to deal with, or different ones. But in general, these are the big fundamentals, and it's very hard to think about all this stuff when you're making an image, and especially if you're used to seeing people draw just kind of like speed painting videos where they just start doing stuff. Maybe they just start like putting colors down and then building an image, and it looks really cool, and it's like, well, how did they do that? Or if you've seen Kim Jong-gi draw or something, and he's just doing stuff and it's all in his head, and it's all sort of coming out at once. That's very hard, especially for a beginner. And then the other thing about what should I learn first, that can be a tricky question too. And what I often tell people, although I say, learn proportion first, is it really doesn't matter because you need all of them. So what are you interested in? But generally, I think proportion is the most important out of all of these. I think proportion. And the reason proportion is the most important is because you want things to look a certain way. And proportion is how big a thing is in relation to other things. So if your proportions were really off and you made a person like a tiny head, a big body, and big legs, okay, and then what they're supposed to look like is sort of like a big head and a small body, and you've got the proportions wrong, everything is off. Like this is just wrong. Whereas if you had a tiny or a big head and you got the proportions, relatively correct, but you had a problem with the anatomy, like, well, one eye is here, one eye is here. In general, this is still more correct than this, where maybe the anatomy is all right, but the proportions are all wrong. So that's why I think proportions are really important. And I guess in terms of fundamentals, I also consider above all of this, like this is good, but I consider, above these are the storytelling and ideas. And I know I'm talking about fundamentals about art, and you could say, well, this is, more like writing, not art. But actually, it's kind of really important anyway, because you're still making an image. And why are you making an image? Because you want to tell a story, you want to tell an idea, or you want to show an idea. So you're always going to be dealing with storytelling and ideas, and not thinking about that is kind of not dealing with a fundamental. So anyway, oh, and I'm using Clip Studio Paint just cause I wanted to try using Clip Studio Paint instead of Photoshop. So if you're wondering what program is this, it's Clip Studio Paint. Anyway, so when you tackle a concept and you need to get all these and they're overwhelming, how do you do it? Well, I think the best way is manageable chunks, as I've said. So if I was going to make an image, right? Let's come up with the idea first. Like, what's an idea? Well, so I want to make an image, and I want it to be something that doesn't take too long, so I can make it in a tutorial. So it doesn't take too long. So I can show you the different fundamentals in as much as I can in real time, because I've enjoyed kind of showing stuff in real time rather than like time lapsing it. So maybe I'll do like a character and a head, maybe a bust. Okay, let's just do a character bust. So I want to show a character and I want them to be interesting. All right, so that's a starting point. Now from that, I can say, okay, what kind of character? Well, maybe I'll do a male character, and an adult male character. I want to have some nice, I want to have some lighting on them and some interesting colors. So lighting, so maybe it takes place daytime or something, or just something with interesting lighting, and kind of want a unique, funny-ish character. So, all right. I'm not sure. I'm just making this up. So normally I'd have like more of an idea, but even with this, it's like, okay, I can kind of get an idea of where I'm going with this. So I want to do like a male character and show off, some lighting, character bust, and have an interesting person. Okay, so that's the first thing I need to do before I've done anything. The next thing I would do probably, so this is kind of like dealing with the idea. Rather than just starting to paint, I'm kind of getting things worked out. Next, I'd probably do thumbnails. So, you know, making some ideas. But even before thumbnails, you could just like make, okay, what do I want? I want like a guy, all right? Maybe he's like looking towards the screen, but he's like facing this way. Maybe he's like a shopkeeper type dude. Okay, shopkeeper. And he's, you know, looking at us, or camera. All right. And okay, so that's the starting. So really it's just about breaking everything down as much as you can so nothing is too difficult. So what's the next thing I'm going to do? Well, thumbnails. Okay, but even before then, what I'm going to do is change the white of the page, because I hate working off white because it's too stark. Like this is too much contrast. It's hard to deal with. Whereas when things are a lot, like if I was just doing this and I was using like a light color, that's a lot more comfortable to me. There's less contrast. It feels like there's less commitment. So you can do it one of two ways. You could, have like a light background and work in a light color, or you could do the opposite and have a darker tone. Maybe working on like a mid-tone. Like for instance, you could have like that as your background, and then you could work with like something like that. And that's also fine. And it's less scary to work on, I guess. So if I was doing this traditionally, I'd probably be using like a lighter, maybe a colored pencil, or I just draw really lightly with my with whatever tool I'm using, whether it's a pen or a pencil. And one of the easiest ways to draw lightly is just change the way you hold the pen or the pencil. So if this is like the pencil, and normally you're used to like holding it here towards the front, what you can do is just change your position so you hold it back here, and then your lines are going to be lighter. They're going to be a bit less accurate, but they're going to be lighter. So that's like a little tip. Okay, so let's do some thumbnails. I'll try to not do too many. Normally I would do quite a bit more, but I just want to get the idea down as quickly as possible and get this image on the way. So let's just do 3 thumbnails. And I'm not going to be worried about all the things, like all the lighting and perspective and proportion and anatomy and all that, but I'm going to kind of think about the result that I want. And I'm also going to switch to a bigger brush. And why am I doing that? Well, because I want, another way to do it is just like work off tiny images like that. But I want to not be focused on any details. So what I want is like, okay, we'll have like a shopkeeper guy. And said he's looking at the camera. And okay, maybe he's like kind of skinny with a big head. All right. And then I'm not sure how much background stuff. Probably I'm not going to do too much background stuff for this because it's just going to take way too long. So let's just say that's one. We could have it where like he's really high up and then kind of looking at us. Maybe he's like waving and just thinking about his character, like maybe he's hunched over, maybe he's like kind of small and he's behind his counter thing, and we get to see all these objects, right? So these are just ideas and they're very loose. And so I am thinking about composition roughly in terms of shapes. So I'm thinking in terms of like, do I have an interesting negative shape here? And then if so, that's good. Here, you got this negative shape, this negative shape. This one's a bit less interesting. So how could we make it more interesting? Well, you know, if he's higher up, like maybe he is kind of, his head is really close to the top of the page, and then the counter goes higher, or the other way around. Maybe he's really low. And there's a lot of hanging stuff above him. That could work for like more interest, more visual interest. So yeah, I'm not really thinking about details or anything. I'm just like roughly, we've got like a character. He's here, and I'd probably want to make things more interesting. But I kind of like this one. This one's fine. Okay, so let's say I'm gonna work with this as an idea, like a rough idea of what I'm doing. So now, because I've done this, I don't need to put in as much energy in making like the image, but I still want to understand who this character is. So rather than just jump in and try and make like the picture at this point and say, okay, let's just work on that composition, I want to do some sketches for the character to get an idea of like what kind of character are they, what do they look like. So let's say they had a big head and a small body. So now I'm just thinking about very rough and loose ideas. I'm not thinking about tons of detail. I'm just thinking about, you know, whatever is easiest. So I'm drawing in a way that's very simple and a way that is not meant to be attractive, but that is meant to problem solve. And that's a very different way of drawing than drawing to make like a pretty image. So I'm going to say, okay, well, he's going to have like, maybe he has like small eyes and a big nose. And like he smiles a lot. Okay, maybe his face is kind of like this, like a rectangular shape. Maybe he's like kind of balding. Maybe he's got a comb over. Yeah, something like that. Okay. And kind of outfit does he wear? Maybe he's got like an apron on, and he's got like a tag where his name goes. Or I don't know, that's starting to feel a bit modern. Let's just move on. I think it could work. I'll give him like a shirt underneath, and maybe he like has his sleeves rolled up. Okay, so that's like an idea of the character. And all right, so now let's think about shapes. Well, I already said like his head's kind of boxy, so I could do something like that. And I want the body to be kind of boxy too, very skinny. Maybe something like this, and maybe short, you know, so his legs aren't that tall. And he's got big hands. All right, so now we've got like a character, the big shape of the character. Now if I wanted to work off that, what I can do is just like lower the opacity of this and now work on top of that. So the benefit of doing this is that I can have this big picture down, and I don't have to worry about like if I was drawing, you know, trying to make a finished image from scratch, and I'm like trying to draw, but also I'm trying to design. Like, oh, what's his nose look like? Does it look like that? Oh, maybe not. Maybe undo and then try like other things. It's like, well, this is going to be much harder for you because this gives you a framework, and whatever I do, like even if I deviate heavily, I still have a general idea of things. So let's say his head is kind of rounded here, but it's got a bit of this light bulb shape. You know, he's looking pretty gaunt right now. Not sure if I'll keep that or not, but for now it's like, okay, let's give him this kind of nose, and I want him to be like friendly. Maybe not like super handsome or anything, but just friendly and something like that maybe. And okay, so now I can refer to this for ideas like, oh yeah, he had a comb over. And I know this might seem like a lot of stuff to deal with when it's just like, well, I just wanted to give him big ears. Just wanted to make a picture. But I think this wanting to make a picture is kind of, it's like a nice impulse, but then it's not fun when you get into it and then you run into all these problems. And I think for myself, I've done this so much where I basically, it was more fun to just make stuff in a way from a screen. I'd put scribbles down and turn it into something. That's fine, but that's kind of like its own thing. But if I was actually wanting to make an illustration, I think, you know, just diving in too soon makes things a lot more complicated. Whereas when you problem solve in the beginning and you make sure you're only kind of dealing with one problem at a time, then it gets a lot easier. So I mean, to get to this point, I kind of need to know a bit about anatomy. So I'm not saying you can do this with no fundamentals, but you could be, you know, spending some time on like, well, I'm going to learn about shape design. I'm going to try and study kind of head shapes could I make, for instance, and pair them with different body shapes. And what does that look like, right? Like this stuff is pretty simple. And do that for a while, and then it's like, okay, well, I can make even a stick person look cool and look interesting. So then, you know, when you apply this stuff to like more fundamentals, they stack. At least that's how I think about it. I really think about all these things as very important and stacking on top of each other. You might not use all of them, but they all kind of have a place they can stack, I feel. Okay, so this guy, let's say he's got like his collar and it's pretty big. It like goes outside. And we said he had his sleeves rolled up. And then he had like an apron on top. And maybe it goes to about there. And skinny legs. And big hands. All right, so this is kind of like the character, I guess, that I want to work with. All right, so now I've got the character. So what's the pose? Well, the pose is going to be, I wanted him looking at the camera and kind of maybe leaning on his, maybe he's like showing something that he wants you to buy. Like, oh, this is, maybe it's like a crystal thing. Oh, I got this fancy crystal. You want to buy it? And he's like turned because I want it to be more interesting. If I make him looking forward and I make his body forward as well, that's going to be pretty boring. So I'm just trying to think of ways of like making this more interesting as an idea, as an image. Sorry. Okay, so I've got the character, I've got the pose. Now I can work on the composition. So let's say I want kind of like a vertical composition, and it's this guy. I want his like this much of the area to probably be like the head. And here I'm thinking about shape design again. You know, like you've got kind of like a triangle for the body. You've got the counter as like a rectangle, and then you've got his hand here holding on to a thing and kind of showing it off. So you have this kind of framing going on, if you can see, where this arm is going to be on the counter, so we don't see too much of it in terms of negative space. But then this part is all framed, right? So that's going to show my interest. Okay, so now I've got the composition down. So looking back at the fundamentals now, we've kind of got this down, and we've got the composition down, and we've got the shape down. Okay, gesture. Let's talk about gesture then. Okay, so the gesture is, gesture is like, just, I guess, draw on top of this. It's okay. Maybe I'll push this out. I'll have this more curved, have like a gesture here with a hand, and this one is slouched. Maybe I want to show a bit more of the back. So yeah, you get that gesture more. Maybe that's the composition. Okay. All right. So I got the gesture down. I've got the composition down. Okay, what's the perspective? So for the perspective, I guess it's pretty much one point. We're kind of looking towards him. What's our eye level? That's really important. Are we looking up at him? Are we looking down at him? I said he's kind of short, so we should kind of be looking down on him then. So maybe we see, you know, more of the top of his head, for instance. Something more like this. And so our horizon might actually be a bit higher, and that's going to make it look like we're looking down on him. All right, so I don't want to get too much into details. I mean, I'm just doing a character, so I don't want to, you know, go crazy with perspective, but it is important to have like a sense of these things. So now I can kind of block out my character and have the perspective. I can see the shapes from this one. And now I'm dealing with far fewer problems than I would be if I tried to just make an image. Like, I'm gonna make a picture. That's gonna be harder. Okay, so now we've got the gesture, we've got the composition, we've got sort of the perspective down, we've got the proportions down. So what else? So we've got proportion, gesture, perspective. So we need anatomy, we've got composition. So basically we just need the anatomy now, and then we can go into the coloring thing. So that's great. Okay, so now that I've got this, what I can do is just work off it really. So I don't need to, I'm just going to get rid of the saturation here. I don't need to worry about, I want to keep this design, but I don't want to worry too much about the roughness or the messiness of it. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this and expand it until it is like the size of, you know, the image I want. So now I've created like a pass. That's how I think of them. Like I'm working in passes. And I'm going to keep it a bit to the side. And the reason is so I can have this guy, where is he? There he is. This guy kind of still be seen. So don't need this stuff, but this guy, you know, it's useful to have him there. And then for this, I'm going to lower the opacity again, because I don't want to, like, this is very hard to work off of. But if I just see it in a very subtle way, it's much easier to build off that. And I'll make it a bit more dark just so it, you know, shows up nicely on screen. But that's basically it. So now I've got the kind of the elements that I wanted, the pieces of the puzzle down. Maybe I wanted that a bit higher up. But yeah, okay, so that's good. So now I'm just going to focus on these other issues. Like, let's see. Well, I want some framing. So that's where we'll frame it. And I'm still working in a very rough way. Like, this isn't going to be the final image or anything like that. But it's each step is really dealing with one problem. So when I was working on the perspective, I was just thinking about, do I want to look up at him or down at him? When I was thinking of the composition, I was just thinking about what is the negative and the positive shapes and what's going to look good, what's a good distribution. When I was thinking about the character, I was just thinking about the design and like the shapes and getting the expressions down. So each thing is just dealing with one thing. And I feel like that's a very effective way to work on things. And it also shows you what you're missing. So for instance, if I was working on the perspective and then I was like, wait, I don't understand this at all. Okay, well, that's something to start building off. If I got to the proportions and I was like, well, I really suck at proportions. Okay, this shows I don't have enough drawing experience. So maybe I'll watch a video on how to draw in proportion. And I think I have a bunch of videos on that topic. But there's other people out there with those videos, or you could just, learn it yourself, draw a lot. So whatever the problem I encounter is that I encounter first, I'll start learning it. I'll deal with it. If my problem was, well, my anatomy sucks, fine. I'm going to learn anatomy then. But when it comes to making a final image, it can be very hard, even if you know those things, to juggle them all. So, okay, now I'm going to do another layer, but I'm going to keep it still rough, just so I can get like the basic shapes down. So, I mean, this is pretty much, I guess I want him looking not perfectly head on, because that's going to be a bit boring, but a bit down. And I'm drawing these lines kind of like this. And the reason I'm doing that is to remind myself that we're looking down on him. So I'm thinking in terms of like a cylinder. If you were looking down on a cylinder, like a can of soup or something, you'd see the top of it. Soup. And things are going to go around. So I'm thinking of that we're looking down on him. I'm looking at the perspective. I'm thinking about the counter and how that's going to be looked down on as well. So we might see, for instance, the counter going off. And we had this in like pretty much 1-point perspective. So maybe, he's in a little area here. Like he's in his little shop area. Maybe there's like a place for him to get out back here. And then these are like the inside shelves. Then we're still looking at him. So now I'm building the form and keeping the perspective in mind, but also getting this shape. So I get the shapes down. And I think when it comes to perspective, it really helps to get the big picture down before the perspective, rather. Like, what I don't like is to start on... Let's just get rid of these two. To start thinking of perspective, like, oh, I'm drawing a guy in perspective, so let me start with a box in perspective and then fit a head in here. I think that's harder. I think what's easier is to say, no, I'm going to start with a blob that resembles a head, but it doesn't have obvious perspective. Like, I'm not sure if this was in a box, where would it be? I think that this is better, though, because we're used to seeing this. This is just like a person out of focus. You could think, oh, well, what would a person out of focus look like in this view? And then you can kind of lower the opacity on that. And then if you built a box at that point, you would have a much better sense. Or even if you kind of work out, a bit more in terms of, where the head is, then you start saying, well, in a box, where would the corner of the head be? Like maybe there. Okay, so now you can sort of build that box and build the perspective around this head that's already kind of there. So the proportion of the box in perspective is going to be much more head-like than it would be if you started with a box. Because then it's like, well, how wide, how, you know, this is kind of hard to work off of. So let's go back to this. So we're looking down on this guy. Probably see his shoulders, and then he's holding this arm up and this arm is going down. So because I have the pose, I can just kind of block things in pretty quickly. I'm gonna keep this hand kind of off the page, but keep this on a counter. So we see his counter kind of looking down on him. There's his other shoulder, and then his back is kind of hunched over, and this is, you know, this is all behind him. Maybe there's like stuff in these shelves. Again, I'm not gonna spend too much time on the background. So if we're looking here, maybe the door is like up here. And now this guy starts to look a bit shorter because we're really looking down on everything. And yeah, the hand is up here, and he's showing his little thing that he wants you to buy, a trinket or something, I don't know. And for the hand, I just do it like I'm just doing rough things that indicate the hand, because once I see this, it's much easier for me to figure out, well, what would that hand look like? But if this is really hard for you and you're like, well, I don't know how to draw hands at all. Okay, great. So now you know what to work on, which is drawing hands. All right. And I feel the neck is a bit too long here. So because everything is super rough right now, I actually like how the head tilted a bit. That's kind of nice. It's like, he's like, huh? What do you think? What do you think? Because everything is so rough and not defined, I can change things so easily, and there's no commitment, there's no fear. Whereas if this was like, had I already started and I was thinking and drawing at the same time, and I want to change something, that's going to be kind of an investment, right? It's like, well, but I already spent an hour on this arm or something. How can I just erase that? That's so much work down the drain. But if it's this, it's like, it's so simple. Do I put the nose up here? Do I put the nose down here? Do I put the nose like there? It's so easy to change things. So now let's deal with the next layer, which is probably, you know, we'll put in the anatomy and some of the character of this guy. So I'm going to lower the opacity again of the background layer, and also lower the opacity of this one. So each time I'm working on top, and I'm making everything into manageable chunks. That's the thing. That's a lesson's title, manageable chunks. All right, so now I want to get his face down quickly because I want to get this expression. So I like these eyes and how his brow kind of does this type of thing. Right, and he's kind of looking at us. And then I like how the nose, you know, overlaps. And then he's got these big cheeks. This comes out. And then he's got this smile. He's trying to convince you this is really cool. Okay. And let's push the nose out even more so this eye is behind here. And I'm not worried about, you know, style or line too much. I'm just worried about getting the expression down, and then kind of the anatomy, because I've got all the pieces here now. So let's get like the head. This head's kind of a ball. Get the cranium. I'm drawing through the form. I'm gonna get the neck, and I'm gonna pop out the Adam's apple a bit, and the back of his head. Then he has big ears. So let's stick them out there like that. And get the chin coming back. And maybe this comes out a bit more, but it connects like right with his neck. There's not much definition, and here there wasn't a lot of definition either, so that's good. So I can get that in. And then he, I guess I can just put in all the anatomy. So here's the trapezius coming down. Here's the shoulder. So he was a nude. This is what he'd look like, I guess. This arm coming forward. This one going like this. He's got his pectoralis here. The ribs going down like this. Lats going up in there. Bicep, tricep. And this arm, it kind of feels bad that it's coming off the page like that. So what I'll do is just shift this all up a bit more so I can get that arm, so I can get the arm in the page. Okay, what is, I draw, okay, I can draw again. Oh. I can't draw this part? That's weird. Okay. So I don't know what that's about. Can't draw beyond this point. Something incredible is happening there. I can do it again. I didn't understand that. All right. So anyway, so yeah, the other hand is here. And then get this hand more defined. Here's the thumb, comes around like this. Here's the other fingers, and then this one is like holding on to this thing, crystal-like thing. All right, so you know that's like roughly how I can build this piece up. So each time I'm just tackling one issue, right? So after this, it's like, well, okay, so let's put the clothing on him. And where does that go? So again, I can kind of lower the opacity of this and then work on top of it again. And each time you're kind of bringing it into focus more and more. And I'll just leave the face because I kind of got it done. I forgot to put the hair. I've got to make sure the hair, you know, follows this. But I would like to kind of speed up now because there's not a whole lot more to talk about, really. Like the main point has been covered, which is, you know, deal with things one at a time, and they get a lot easier than if you're dealing with them all at once. It can be really hard. And when you deal with any of the things, you're only thinking about that. So for instance, I'm not thinking about how pretty it is when I'm working on the perspective, in terms of like, oh, this line looks bad or anything like that. I'm just thinking about the perspective. That's it. It's one problem to solve at a time. And yeah, that makes things way, way easier. All right, so he has his collar coming around that was really big. And then he has like an apron coming around there. Maybe it pushes on that collar. I don't know. And then he's got his shirt, which is doing something like that. And then this one is doing something like that. And yeah, I mean, you know, I think you get the idea. So I'm not going to go into tons of detail with all this stuff. But yeah, you know, apron would be down here. Maybe this collar wouldn't come out that much. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. So let's give him more of a regular collar and then put the the, uh, 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 And you know, it gets messy, but you can always erase and redraw on top and clarify your ideas. At least digitally. Traditionally, yeah, you can do the same thing. It just gets a bit messier. Okay. And then even if I was dealing with things like color, so let's say we dealt with all of this and we got the image down. I actually just use this one because it's easier to demonstrate, because it's a lot simpler. So let's say I wanted to color this guy. Well, I could, you know, first of all, make sure the design is nice and tight. So maybe I'm still working on the line art. So I'd go and zoom in and I'd make this big, and I'd really try to focus on nice lines now, like maybe making sure there's variation in the line width, that all the little details, like his lower eyelid, for instance, are included. Maybe, you know, depending on how detailed you want it to be, maybe there's like little hatching marks and stuff. But that's something I would work in after every other thing is solved already, right? So let's say that was all good. I'll just roughly put in the guy. And I'm just working on the color now. So I would still do it very incrementally. Like I would work on the flats first, and then I would work on the shadows. So let's just get his head down. Imagine that's all neat and tidy. All right, so the flats would be like the big overall shape. So, or like the colors as they are. For instance, let's say his skin was yellow. That would be yellow skin, like that. What I like to do first, though, is I generally like to block in the shape of the thing first. So I'll get like him blocked in. And here I'm just using, in Clip Studio, I'm using a pen. It's called the Turnip pen. And I just like to use that when I want something to be at 100% opacity. There's a bunch of different ways of coloring in different programs, but in this one, I'm just coloring in this way. And I mean, there's different ways within this program too, of coloring in, or any program. But I just want to block out this. So now what I can do is I can clip the other layers down, and then it'll only stay within this spot. And that's what I want. So now I'll work on the flats. So let's say the skin tone. And I'm not worried about like little variations in the skin. I'm just thinking about what part is the skin. Again, you can do this a variety of different ways. Here I'm actually just sort of like manually coloring it in. And that's, you know, that's fine. It takes a bit longer. If the lines were a lot cleaner, I could probably just fill. But for now, I'm manually filling it in. And just because it's just a head, so it's not going to take too much time. And by filling in the skin on its own layer, what that lets me do is fill in the hair much easier. You'll see how, okay, because I have to kind of be careful on this, on the whatever the first layer is, you have to be a bit more careful, but then subsequent layers, you get to be less careful. Or you have to be less careful. Okay, so all that's in. So now if I want to put in the hair, I can pretty easily fill that in. And I just make a layer underneath this one, the one that's clipped, and it's also going to be clipped. And let's say his hair is like this color. Okay, so there, see, it's very easy to put that in now. It didn't have to be precise at all. And you can do the same thing for like the lid of the eye. But at this stage, I'm just worried about putting in colors where they go. I'm not actually worried about the color. Does that make sense? Like, I'm worried about placing the colors in the right spot. But for instance, let's undo that. Let's just give him this horrible garish green, the white of the eye, the sclera. Okay, I'm not worried that it is this horrible green. I'm only worried that it is in the white of the eye. And let's give him like red eyes. Okay, so now what I can do is I can just adjust the colors. So now I can just think about the color. For instance, I don't want that to be green. So let's make it like a blue and super desaturated and much lighter. So something like that. Let's make the eye a different color. So again, now I'm only thinking about, actually I kind of liked it being pink, kind of interesting. I'm only thinking about color. I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm not thinking about, well, what about the perspective or anything, you know, close to that. I'm only thinking about one thing at a time. So like, oh, the pink on his lower lid, maybe it's a bit more pinkish and a bit less saturated, something like that. Okay, so now I can think about, well, maybe the lines. I want the lines to be colored. Okay, so I can color the lines as well. Let's just make them maybe like this color. Okay, so now I've got the lines colored in maybe that. And now let's say I want to work on shadows. Okay, so now I just need to worry about the shadows. So again, it's one thing at a time. So maybe for the shadows, I'm gonna use like this type of color. And I'm just gonna think about what is the form. I'm not gonna just put in shadows on everything. First, I'm gonna just ask, where's the light coming from and what is the form that it's hitting? So if the light's coming from, let's just say the light's coming from directly above. And I want his entire brow ridge, I'm gonna set this on multiply, to kind of be in shadow. Because the light's coming just pretty much straight down. But then the eyelids are gonna be, you know, the lower eyelids are going to be in shadow. Maybe there's a shadow cast on his eyeball. There's a shadow under his nose for sure. And then his nose is also casting a shadow onto his face. And under his cheekbone, there's going to be a shadow. You know, this part's kind of receding, so maybe this area is going to get darker in general. In the ear, you're going to get shadows as well. And then here too, because this area is on the side of the plane. We're kind of going down. And then underneath, you definitely get shadows. Possibly the whole head is casting a cast shadow on the neck. So that whole neck can be in shadow. And here, you know, as you get more experience, you could, you know, work on making those shadows nice in terms of not just putting them in roughly, but if you weren't sure, it would be completely fine to just make a layer of rough shadows, like, oh, roughly they go here, and then make a new layer and clean them up. So let's say I did these all super roughly, then I just make another shadow layer. But this time, maybe I'd even move that to the side, and then I have it as reference, and then now I just kind of go in and very, you know, subtly and cleanly add all these details. And then I would just be focusing on, you know, what's a nice brush stroke that would convey this form and that would look pretty. So, you know, like something like this might look nice. I also want to convey the roundness of this skull. So here, I mean, this kind of turned out a bit cartoony, Sorry about that. It's just my style, I guess, is cartoony these days. But I hope this kind of is, you're getting the idea, right? Like by breaking things down, I can fairly rapidly create an image that, I mean, this isn't the shopkeeper image because that would, I realize now how perhaps overly ambitious that would have been to, okay, do all of that. But it does give you an idea of what to work on. And then maybe the next thing I'm working on is like, you know, like really small details. I want to get these eyes to really feel, I don't know, maybe more realistic. You know, now I'm only dealing with that one problem then, you know. And you could add a bunch of detail if you wanted. It's not something I really am a huge fan of, but, you know, if that's what you like, you can add detail and build these things. Maybe there's like a nice highlight, like a juicy highlight right here. Okay, that makes things kind of come alive. And then maybe around it there's like a glow, and it's like a bluish glow, and that'll make the eye highlight just have a bit of character. And then maybe it lights up this part of his eye here, so that feels quite jewel-like now, right? Like you can keep working on these things and get more and more information. So now, I mean, I could put, for instance, a highlight. We know the highlight's coming from this top spot, so I could put a highlight there, maybe a highlight there, maybe one there, maybe in the hair. But again, only dealing with one thing at a time, and that really makes the fundamentals a lot easier when you're focused on that. And then maybe, you know, after, if you're doing a much more realistic version, you might not like these lines to even show, and maybe you want to make this a full painting. Well, now it's just a matter of dealing with edges. So, you know, is this a hard edge or a soft edge? Well, here it's going to be a harder turn, but then within the nose it's going to be softer because it's a form turn. So form turns are soft, and I covered this in the RGB video I made last time, but you know, basically form turns are soft and cast shadows make harder shadows, and they can get more soft if your lighting is very ambient. But you know, like you can take this as far as you want, but by only dealing with one thing at a time, it's way easier because my issues are much smaller. So I mean, this is if you're getting overwhelmed with things, because if you're the type of person who you can just do a speed painting, and actually, you know, as you get experience more, you can kind of just do that anyway. Like skip a lot of steps, and I don't have to work it out all step by step. I can kind of do it all at once. But in the beginning, that can be really hard. And even as you get experience, sometimes you want to do that because you feel like, well, yeah, I mean, I know how to do this, right? And then you run into trouble because it's not actually as effective as if you carefully just dealt with each problem one at a time. And then just get a much nicer result because, you know, you took the time. Each thing you're dealing with just one issue. So yeah, I guess that's it. That's it for this one. Basically, if you're having trouble juggling all the fundamentals at once, don't juggle them at once. Juggle them one at a time. And if you're having trouble with any one thing, consider making it just that problem and not a bunch of other problems. You're not compounding your issues, because that gets really tricky once you start adding more and more stuff. It becomes more and more complicated. Like at this point, let's say I wanted like a very strong rim light. Well, because I'm only focused on the rim light, it's much easier to add that. But if I was focused on everything, including the rim light, that might be kind of hard. That might be hard to pull off. So yeah, just deal with one thing at a time and one fundamental at a time. And I think it should make your life easier. And if you're really struggling, it really lets you know, well, okay, start working on this fundamental. Just work on the first one that is an issue. You know, try and make your image. What's the first problem? Well, I couldn't get the proportions right. All right, proportions. That's your big issue. Or I couldn't get the anatomy right. All right, well, looks like you're gonna be doing anatomy study then, right? So yep, that's it. I hope this helped, and thanks for watching.